Hello, today I'm back with the ranking. This time I'm going to be for the band Black Sabbath. Definitely a pretty legendary band. The band that, of course, started it all pretty much when it comes to metal. Now, recently we did lose someone fairly important, especially in the metal scene, and that person is, of course, Ozzy Osbourne. Definitely one of the most unique, one of the most iconic names out there in the world of metal, and, of course, highly influential. The band in general, of course, being highly influential, influencing so many bands through multiple generations. And yeah, Ozzy Osbourne, definitely rest in peace. But yeah, with this ranking, just like all my other rankings, we'll be going from worst to best. Keep in mind, this is just my personal ranking. You don't have to agree with it, but feel free to let me know your ranking in the comment section below. But yeah, this is definitely one of the toughest rankings I've had to do. I mean, my bottom three and my top three are pretty much concrete, but when it comes to the stuff in the middle, that's where it gets tougher. So this is a ranking that could change at any time, specifically the albums that are towards the middle. But at the bottom, pretty easy choice, pretty common choice. Common choice that people point to when it comes to picking the worst album from these guys, and that album is Forbidden from 1995. Overall, definitely one of their worst sounding albums. Production's overall not great, and I still think all this time later, I still think track number 2 is the only decent song on here, and that song is Get a Grip. I'm not sure how other fans feel about this song, but personally, I think it's a decent song. But the rest of the album does nothing for me. I mean, The Illusion of Power, which of course has Ice-T, not a great song. I think the chorus is okay, but that's about it. But yeah, overall, not a very good album. Easily their weakest in my opinion. The next in my ranking, probably this album definitely oozes 80s cheese, and that album is 7th Star. This album in general just does not sound like Black Sabbath at all. If I remember correctly, this album was actually intended to be a solo album for Tony Iommi, but of course the label wanted the Black Sabbath name, so I guess they went with Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi, which kind of sounds somewhat awkward a little bit. But yeah, either way, it was 7th Star overall. Even on its own, I don't think this is a very good album. And For the Kill is the only song I like off this album. One of the more upbeat, or I guess you could say maybe one of the more heavier songs off of here, but yeah, I do like that song, but the rest of the album doesn't really do much for me, especially track number 2, the ballad No Stranger to Love, which is pure 80s cheese and just not Black Sabbath at all. But yeah, not a very good album. To me, easily one of the weakest. Now, the next album I'm ranking, I've noticed this album does have its share of fans, especially when it comes to the Tony Martin fans. But personally, I've tried to get into this album, but I've pretty much at this point kind of accepted that this album is just not for me. But I do like one song, but the rest of the album unfortunately isn't really my thing, and that album is Tear. I don't know, man. This is an album that just doesn't, I don't know, maybe it just doesn't quite connect with me. I mean, I like the album opener, Anno Mundi. Forgive me if I butchered the name. I think that song is alright. I think that's really the only song I like off of here. I mean, outside of that song, I mean, Sabbath Stones and Feels Good to Me, I think, are a couple other songs I think are alright, but at the same time, not really something I'd be in a rush to return to either. But yeah, Tear. Overall, not a big fan of it. Not the worst thing ever, but personally, I'm not too big on it. But next in my ranking, I don't know if it's a hot take for having this album this low, but I still, even with it being this low, I still think this album is still alright or / okay. And that album is 13, their final album. I think it's an okay album. I think it's one of those albums that starts off strong, but kind of closes off on a somewhat meh note. There isn't any songs on here that I would say are straight up bad. I mean, I'd say all the songs are good, but some of them I'd say are somewhat kind of meh / average. But I think it starts off strong with the first 3 songs, with End of the Beginning, God Is Dead, and Loner. I think all 3 of those songs are pretty good, but I feel like the songs after that don't really come to the same level as those 3. but that's just my opinion. But that's not saying that the rest of the songs are straight up bad. But at the end of the day, this is just not really an album that I ever really reach for. When I'm in the mood for Sabbath, this is an album that rarely crosses my mind. But overall, an okay album. But for me, I think they've done better though. But it's still an okay final album. Now, next in my ranking. Now, this might be one that might piss off some people, because I know there's some people that definitely have this album much higher. But I gave this album a recent re-listen too, so I've given this album a fair shot. But I still think this is, to me, towards the bottom half of their discography. And that album is Never Say Die, the final album that they did with Ozzy until, of course, 13. But yeah, Never Say Die. I'd say, just like with 13, an okay album, but I definitely wouldn't say great or amazing though. I think it starts off pretty strong, kind of like with 13. With this album, the first 3 songs are definitely the best songs on here. The title track, I think, is a pretty good anthem for them. Johnny Blade, I'd say I might like that song as much as the title track, because I know the title track is obviously the biggest song on here, but I think Johnny Blade's another pretty good song off of this album. I also like Junior's Eyes. I think that song is kind of underrated. I do really dig that one, but I feel like the album somewhat kind of goes off a cliff after those 3 songs. With that said, there are some things to like after those first 3 songs. I mean, I do like the riff work in A Hard Road. And then I think Shockwave and Over to You are all right, but at the same time, nothing super special either, and nothing that I would return to or be in a rush to return to. It's probably the better way to put it, I'd say. But yeah, Never Say Die, an okay album, but even with Ozzy, they've definitely done better. But next to my ranking, an album that I feel is somewhat kind of underrated. Going back to the 90s, we got Cross Purposes, the album that sees the return of Tony Martin after, of course, Dehumanizer, which that album would, of course, be their final album with Dio. But yeah, Cross Purpose, I think this is actually a decent album. I think more people should give this album another chance. With that said, is this top shelf Black Sabbath? Absolutely not. I mean, again, it's not super high in the ranking, but I still think this album is somewhat underrated. Some of my favorites on here being Eyewitness, which is maybe my favorite song off of here. I do like the doomy Virtual Death. The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, I dig the riff work from Tony in that song. And then Evil Eye, I think, is easily one of the best songs on here. Another song off this album that I think is pretty underrated. Even when you go to the more melodic songs, I do think Cross of Thorns is pretty good. I do like Tony's vocals in that song especially. But yeah, Cross Purposes, solid album. Now, I wouldn't say like masterpiece or awesome or anything like that, but still, I'd say an album that's worth another listen for those who haven't heard it in a while. But next to my ranking, the first album with Tony Martin, The Eternal Idol. Kind of like with Seventh Star, this album definitely has its 80s cheese, especially when you got the keyboards. I mean, again, you do have some 80s cheese in here, which I know is a turnoff for some Sabbath fans, but I do know that there's definitely a good share of Tony Martin fans too. And when it comes to the Tony Martin albums, or the stuff that he did with Black Sabbath, I'd say I like some of it. I'd probably move more closer to the middle. But now, if we're talking Tony Martin as a vocalist, I do like him as a vocalist. I do think he has a good voice, and I think this album is a good introduction to his era or his string of albums. I do like The Shining. I think that's a pretty good anthem for them, especially maybe one of my favorite singles from them when it comes to their 80s work. When it comes to the deeper cuts, I do like Ancient Warrior and the heavier Hard Life to Love. Eternal Idol, I do dig. I think that song has maybe some of my favorite riff work from Tony on the album. Nightmare, I think, is another pretty good song off of here. But yeah, Eternal Idol, solid album. Next to my ranking, another more controversial album, but I seem to like this album more than some people. But with that said, another album that I'd say is not top shelf Sabbath, but I still think it's still solid for what it is. But it does suffer from poor production, and the album, of course, I am talking about is Born Again. Their only album with Ian Gillan. I don't care what anyone says. I like this album. Now, I wouldn't say that I love it, but I do like it, though. I think Trashed is definitely one of the best songs on here. I do also like Disturbing the Priest. That song, to me, has some of Ian's best vocals on the album. And then Zero the Hero, I think, has some of the best instrumentation on the album. Maybe some of my favorite guitar work on the album. Now, you do have some moments that are not so great, like Digital Bitch, but I think the title track is all right. I think it kind of closes off on a somewhat weak note with Hotline and Keep It Warm, which those songs being, to me, just okay. But, yeah, I do like this album, but don't love it. But next in my ranking, to me, the album that is easily the best album of the Tony Martin albums, and that is Headless Cross. Their second album with Tony Martin, and I think this album is actually pretty solid. The title track, to me, is one of the best songs on the album, and another song that I think is one of their best singles when it comes to their 80s output. But I think you do get some good deep cuts on here, like Devil and Daughter, which I think is probably maybe one of their most underrated songs out. Honestly, I think that song's actually pretty good. If you haven't heard it or haven't heard it in a while, definitely give that song another listen. When Death Calls, I think, is another highlight off the album. I really like Black Moon. That song, to me, has some of my favorite vocal work from Tony on the album. That's Nightwing is also pretty good too. I also like the guitar work in Kill and the Spirit World. But yeah, overall, solid album. But next to my ranking, another album, kind of like with Born Again, where I seem to like this album more than some people. But that album is Technical Ecstasy. Obviously not as good as the Ozzy albums that came before this one, but I do like this album, though. I mean, I think it starts off pretty strong with Backstreet Kids, which I think is easily one of the best songs on here. Now, of course, with this album, you can definitely notice the incorporation of keyboards / synthesizers, which I know is a turnoff for some fans. But personally, I actually don't mind the keyboards or synthesizers in this album. I think Gypsy's another decent song off of here. Rock and Roll Doctor and Dirty Woman, I think, are a couple songs on here that I still think are some of the album's best moments too. It has maybe a couple somewhat skippable songs on here, but that's about it, though. I still think this album is solid. Now, of course, not on the same level as albums like Sabotage or Master Reality, Paranoid, and so on, but I still think it is solid, though. But next to my ranking, another album that I think is somewhat underrated, but Dehumanizer, their final album with Dio, and might have some of the heaviest work on here too. If I were to talk about some of my favorites, I definitely have to say Computer God and TV Crimes. TV Crimes, I think, is another pretty good single for them. Time Machine, that's another one of my favorites off the album. I also like but yeah, another solid album for them. The next in my ranking, we'll be moving to the second album that they did with Dio, and that album is Mob Rules. An album that's actually grown on me over time. For the longest time, I didn't give it as much attention as other albums in their discography, but especially more recently with giving it more listens, I do think this is another good album for them. Turn Up the Night, definitely one of the best songs that they did with Dio, in my opinion. I'd say that one and Voodoo. I also like the title track. That's probably another one of my favorites off the album. Country Girl, I think, is maybe one of the more underrated songs off of here too. But yeah, good album. The next in my ranking, we have Volume 4. And you do have some fan favorites on here, like Snowblind and Supernaut, which are definitely, of course, some of the best songs on here. And I do like the ballad changes. But I'd probably make the argument that this is one of those albums where you have a stronger first half, but a somewhat weaker second half. But I wouldn't say the second half is fully weak, though, because you do have Snowblind and also Under the Sun, which I think has some of my favorite riff work on the album. But yeah, Volume 4, another good album in their discography. The next time I'm ranking, easily my favorite album when it comes to the Dio albums, and that album is Heaven and Hell. So yeah, so many killer songs off of here. Some pretty good bangers on here, like Neon Nights and Lady Evil, which is probably maybe one of my favorites when it comes to the songs that they did with Dio. Of course, you have other classics off of here, like Children of the Sea and Heaven and Hell, but when it comes to the second half, that's where he gets towards the more deeper cuts. And when it comes to the deeper cuts on the album, I really like Die Young. That's probably my favorite when it comes to the second half, but yeah, pretty good album for them. But next we have Sabotage. And yeah, you definitely have your share of bangers on here. And I think this album has some of Ozzy's best vocals that he ever did. I think the album closer, The Ritz, definitely one of Ozzy's best vocal performances in my opinion. Really killer song, and easily one of my favorites on the album too. Symptom of the Universe has to be probably another one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs. Same with the album opener with Hole in the Sky. I do also like the epic Megalomania. That's another highlight off the album too. But yeah, Sabotage, another pretty good album. The next time I'm ranking, we have the debut album, Black Sabbath. Now the first three songs are my favorites, but I do think all these songs are good though. Wicked World is also pretty good too, and the final track I think is good too. But I will admit, out of the 5 songs, the last one's probably the one that I return to the least. But I still think that one is still all right. But yeah, of course, the title track is legendary. One of the more legendary songs, but even the lesser known songs in here are still pretty good, like The Wizard and again Wicked World. But yeah, pretty good debut album. Next in my ranking, my number 3, we have Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Kind of like with Mob Rules, this is another album that I've grown to appreciate more and more with time. I mean, of course, I've always really liked the title track, but there are some songs on here that I might have not paid attention to as much at one point, but now I love them even more now. But yeah, title track is, of course, definitely one of their classics. But you have other really great songs in here, like A National, Acrobat, and Sabracadabra is another pretty good banger for them. I also like Killing Yourself to Live. That's another one of my favorites on the album. But yeah, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, definitely a great album, definitely one of my favorites. And now we're moving to another fan favorite in their discography, and definitely has some of their biggest songs. And that album is Paranoid at number 2. Yeah, again, some of the biggest songs on here with War Pigs and Paranoid and Iron Man. I also really like Planet Caravan's a song that is a song that I've appreciated more and more with time. I really like that song. And when it comes to the deeper cuts on the album, Electric Funeral I think is one of their more underrated songs. I really like that one. A bit more doomy, and overall I like the guitar work in that song, or the overall groove that you get in that song. But yeah, pretty good album, definitely one of their best. But at the top, this was a pretty easy choice for me. This will probably always be my favorite Black Sabbath album, and that is, of course, Master of Reality. Not a single weak track on it. I'd maybe say this is maybe a perfect album. I mean, you can't go wrong with any of the songs on here. I don't mind the interludes either. I mean, Sweet Leaf, Into the Void, Lord of this World, After Forever, so many killer songs. Children of the Grave being one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs. But yeah, that is my number 1. That is my ranking of the Black Sabbath albums. Let me know your ranking in the comment section below, and all the good stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment and a like, subscribe. Have a nice day, and take care.